Welcome to Birken Forest Monastery. I'm Ajahn Nisabho. This is Ajahn Kovilo of Clear Mountain Monastery down in Seattle. And ever since we came to the Pacific Northwest about 3 years ago, Longpo Sona has been a guide, a mentor to us. This is our second time getting to visit Birken Forest Monastery here, and he invited us to actually have a conversation and specifically to be able to ask him about
hermit dhammas. So that is the practices and life of being a hermit and how that relates to a Buddhist practice, a monastic life. We came to this, we had a conversation just yesterday about different books in the library here at Birken and ended up just picking out Walden by Thoreau, picked out Seven Storey Mountain by Thomas Merton, stories of Peace Pilgrim, and just very naturally led into all sorts of very interesting conversation about your life before coming to robes. So, Longpo, would you be able to tell us a bit about that? What was your entrance into hermit life, and what was your life like as a hermit, and what that meant?
Yeah, when we say hermit, it was before I was in the robes. I already practiced in a couple of communities before, so we got introduced to formal meditation, actually with a Tibetan Lama, a tulku in Toronto, who introduced me to, breath meditation, etc., and then practiced with the Korean Zen monk as well after that for a period of time. So that helped me understand how you could to sustain a life in nature alone without a lot of distractions. I was very interested in going into the forest, and I was, going into the forest in Ontario all winter as well, like for 10 or 12 days, 30, 40 below zero, and all spring, fall, canoe trips, walking trips, couple of weeks at a time, just loving it. And it's part of my early childhood as well, just being in the forest a lot. The problem is, how do you, it's fine to go in for 10, 12 days, but how do you sustain a life in there without, bringing a huge library of books and distractions to mitigate the serenity of the forest? And it was only when I finally discovered meditation and formal meditation that I realized, oh, that's how they do it. I was always intrigued by hermits, and I read books about, trappers and so forth in the north, and then yogis in Tibet and in India, and Taoist hermits and so forth. And I wondered, so how do you do that without just being bored or restless? So that is I had to discover that first, get the formal training before I could undertake it. But it had always been in the back of my mind. Even as a child, I kind of think, why can't I just go off and live in the forest? One time I was about 10 years old. I asked my mother, we were in an area, an off-grid ski resort that my parents had started, and so I lived in an isolated area. And there were range cattle all over the place, and I tended to envy them because they just could. They didn't have to do it. They didn't have to go to school. They didn't need anybody to cook for them or anything. They just ate grass. And I said to my mother, who is also a trained biochemist, could I live on grass? Like, could I just eat grass like that? She said, no. And I said, well, how do the cows do it? And, well, they have a special digestion system and so forth. But like, part of the problem is that your freedom is restricted because of simple needs of food and so forth. You just can't be free. So you can see this idea is coming up in my head, very early. Eventually, I did. I went off for some years alone in a shack, and because of the meditation. But you can't do it without the meditation.
Could you paint us a picture of that day-to-day life of, you can't live off of grass, but I think you had a 50-pound bag of rice, and just give us the day-to-day of Ajahn Sona as a hermit during those early years.
Yeah, I found a shack that was, so I'm a lay person still. I found a shack that I rented for $50 a month. And this is in the early 80s. And it was probably overpriced at $50. No insulation, leaning at the floor sloping off, big gaps in the wall, a lot of friendly mice and pack rats and stuff hanging around. And the roof leaked. It was a tar paper roof, and anytime it rained, which was quite often, leaks everywhere. So, and a very inadequate, almost an ornamental stove. So that didn't actually bother me. I had spent a lot of time just camping out in winter in Ontario, 30 and 40 below zero. I honed my skills, and all I really needed was a good sleeping bag, and I'm okay. So that was nothing to me, but it was nice to actually have it was basically a wooden tent, pretty good compared to, I used to go camping with just a plastic tarp, like just 2 mil plastic, not even a tent. So that didn't concern me at all. There was a river right at my door, a beautiful glacial-fed river. And I was in the bottom of a valley, and the mountains peaks go up 10,000 feet, snow at the peaks all year round, and cascading, heavy forest, full of animals, bears, mountain lions, bobcats, lynx, coyotes, wolves, grizzly bears at the higher elevations, black bears at your door, on the porch, and squirrels and everything. But this is my stomping ground. I was raised in the West Coast, and I just had been out there many, many years, and spent a lot of time going out in the forest with my friends and hitchhiking all over the place as well. So not just a very familiar scene, but the joy of being allowed to just be there continuously. It was just an incredible. I kept saying, "Wow, this is something I've always wanted to do, and now I'm doing it." And I had to solve the food problem, so I brought a 50-pound bag of short grain brown rice, organic, and plopped it into the corner because it keeps well. No refrigeration. There is no electricity, no phones, no radios, no anything. If you want water, you get a bucket out of the river. A sort of dilapidated outhouse. And then I needed to provide something more than brown rice, so I had miso, which keeps indefinitely. And then I thought I attempted to not need to go to town, so I bought a whole bunch of cabbage, carrots, and onions in 5-gallon pails, and I found a hole in the ground that somebody else had dug, and I thought that'd be a root cellar, just keep things down. I lowered the buckets down, and the temperature went to 30 below zero, everything froze. And then it went to 10 above, and then everything thawed and rotted. So I needed to actually hitchhike to the nearest town, 25 kilometers away, every couple of weeks to get more cabbage, carrots, onions, and peanut butter. So I'm living on, I did have a little bag of whole grain wheat, flour, which every now and then I fry, just pour it into a frying pan and make bread with, put the peanut butter on, good. So that was my food every day. And I already had been in a monastery, the Zen monastery and so forth, so I didn't eat after noon. So I call my diet vegan and then some. And people ask me, did you have fruit or anything? I picked wild apples there was a few wild apples that had gone, nobody had lived in these things for 35, 40 years, and these apple trees were still around. So I would pick those and keep them as long as they would last, and that would be my sort of fruit thing. My day, I tried to get up at 4 in the morning, and I'd have to light at first I just had candles, and then eventually I got a kerosene lamp. So I would light this kerosene lamp and then get the stove going in the winter. And the stove was just a toy, really, ornamental toy. So it would be, if it was 25 below zero outside, it'd be 25 below zero inside. I had a good down bag, didn't bother me. I'd get up, it'd take about 2 hours to get the place warm. And then I would fry up some of this bread, this sort of flour thing. And when it got light, I would often, especially the first year, I would go for long walks in the forest. I couldn't just sit in this. I realized I came to be in nature, and I'm in this little wooden shack. I'm not going to sit here in this shack all day. So I'd go out and wander in the forest all over the place, explore the thing, at least 6 hours a day, all over. And then you come back and you have some food and this and that, and then eventually it's dark, and it's a dingy little windows in this thing, and it's heavy forest, and it's in a valley, so you don't have long days. The days are fairly short. So, but whenever I'm there, I'm just meditating. If I'm not having my 20 minutes of lunch, I have nothing else to do, because I deliberately didn't bring books except for the Visuddhimagga, a 800-page commentary that is kind of highly esteemed in the Theravada world in certain schools, to educate myself, and a few little anthologies of suttas and stuff. But I really restricted myself so that I really had to face my existence, that I didn't have an escape from this. There was no way out. I couldn't distract myself or entertain myself. There was no radio or anything else. Just that. That was the sort of the feel of the day. And I would never go to bed before 10. And I would have to do some yoga at around 8 to make sure that otherwise I get sleepy and just want to, pack it in. But to do some hatha yoga, some stretches, some breathing and everything, and then good till at least 10, 11. I aspired to, my aspiration was 4 hours of sleep, but actually it was more needed about 6, yeah.
One of the biggest features of living at a monastery is all of our specific rules. Every 2 weeks we get together and we chant a list from the Buddha, 227, plus we study all the auxiliary rules as well. You've mentioned a couple self-imposed rules. I mean, almost by definition, a hermit is not living by anybody else's rules. For yourself, you took on not eating after noon. You would try to stay up till at least 10. Where did you get your rules from? Would you recite them? Were they written down? What was your hermit code?
Actually influenced by my period at the Zen monastery. And we didn't eat after noon. But that monastery is strictly vegetarian as well. Fairly low calorie diet, a lot of skinny people. I really was skinny. I think you can see pictures of me. I must be 30 pounds lighter than I am now. Really but I felt great, actually. And the same food every day. Really so I imposed these things on myself. Also, even this shack, I didn't fix it up. I wanted to just see if I could be happy with it in its quasi-dilapidated state. I tidied it up as the Zen thing, just bare. And I got up off of the ground. I found an old iron frame single bed in a barn on the property, and I dragged it over. It had just the springs on it, you know, these iron things with springs on it. I found a piece of plywood, and I had a little insulated mat. By the way, in cold weather, a sleeping bag is not adequate unless you have insulation underneath you as well. So I got that, and that kept me off the floor. But I really didn't want to, you know, beautify the place or anything like this. I wanted to just see how happy I could be in its present state. I was practicing with that idea, to be content with the situation. And so the rules were based on the nature of the mind, that to be content with little. I'm not out here. If I could stay in the city, I mean, I left Toronto. I owned a house and I had a wife and all that kind of stuff. I left that all behind. If I wanted the cushy life or the enjoyment, I would have stayed there. But I didn't want that. So the rules, naturally, the 8 precepts basically are what you have. You know, a strict commitment to no romantic relationships or anything like this as well. Celibacy, the brahmacharya. I'd read a lot of books about, you know, hermit life, Zen hermits and Taoist hermits and brahmacharya in India and so forth. And I really knew this, primarily the 8 precepts, you know. Yeah.
So Lumpur, it sounds like you actually found some contentment in this life and this sort of steadily growing happiness. How long did you continue as a hermit? And was it a path of diminishing returns? Like, did you find there was this growth that eventually you left that life in some capacity. So what made you tip into that decision to leave? And yeah, what do you feel began to be lacking? Because I think, you know, many of us know tales of hermits who've, you know, achieved some measure of calm, but then also that there can be a certain insularity or, you know, some other difficulties of character that begin to emerge when you're just alone all the time. So what was your kind of arithmetic in terms of deciding when to come out of the hermit life? And how long did you stay in total?
Well, that particular, I had actually been, you know, more or less hermiting before that shack as well. That wasn't the beginning of it. It was a couple of years before that. I was living in an even more remote place, but I kind of count the pristine hermit life as in that shack. And that was about 3 years. So the whole, just leaving everything behind, hermit life up to arriving in a Theravada monastery in 1988 was about 5 years. And by the way, when I did come to monastic life, after that life, monastic life was fat city. I mean, like, what austerity? Like, somebody gives you food and it was quite, monasteries have fairly nice buildings and stuff like this. I mean, I'd been, you know, in shacks with 25 below zero and just eating the same thing every day that you have to make for yourself and all this. So it was quite easy to be even to the most austere monasteries. I went to Ajahn Chah's monasteries in the Northeast, and it's pretty okay, you know. Nice weather. Yeah, you got to walk barefoot. Okay. So it was a very hard choice to make. After the 3rd year, I realized I'm never going back. By the first year was like, the first year formal, I thought, well, we'll find out. If this doesn't work out, I'll be telling grandchildren stories about the time I was a hermit for a year. But it worked out. And then I'd gone through those 4 seasons, and I realized, okay, I learned a lot, and the next year is going to be easier. And it was. And then by the 3rd year, it was just, I had total confidence in the process, and it was the greatest adventure of my life. It sounds boring, doesn't it? No one. There's no one there. There's no stimulus. There's no. You don't know what the news is. You have no idea what's going on in the world. You're eating the same thing every day, and you have nothing to do but either go for a walk or sit in a shack. Or you can sit on a stone out there, or a stump, or gaze at the river for a while, and then gaze at the sky for a while, and then talk to a squirrel, something like that. But it sounds, it's an incredible adventure. It's kind of like you were exploring a cave, and then when you came out, the nuclear holocaust had happened, and nobody was alive anymore on the planet. Like it's the end of all human interaction. Like you have no social personality. There's nobody to look. You have no social dimension to your life. It's just an amazing thing, and it's an adventure. It's like you keep thinking, wow, it's like as if the world had ended and you're the last person alive. There's movies based around that kind of thing, that situation. So, but I got comfortable with that. And then by the third year, it was like, this is very, very exquisite. I probably won't stay in that shack, but the thought was, there's only two choices here: stay as a hermit or become a monastic. And it's just a matter of getting the right situation, because I don't want to be in an urban area. It'll have to be a forest tradition. And it was very tempting, because I realized no community, no monastic community could ever match the freedom that you have to just do your thing without any having to deal with other people, obligations back and forth. So it was just very tight. But the one thing I realized, okay, you're going to run out of money one of these days. And then what? You're going to have to buy food. You can't be a cow. You can't eat just grass. And so what? I don't want to do that. I never want to have a job and do that. I want to have sustain this life. So I'm going to have to explore the Theravada community, because I was very deeply impressed by the early suttas. And it was very different than the Mahayana type schools. And so it just spoke to me like, okay, yes, now this is lucid, this is clear, this makes sense. So it was just Theravada from then on in, Yeah.
Yeah, this is great advice, and we'll probably open it up for questions in a bit, but we might title the talk or the conversation "Advice for Would-be Hermits."
Yes.
But I'm curious, there's a lot of people living around monasteries. You meet people who you think, this person shouldn't be a hermit, So what advice do you have for people when they're examining their own potentials, their own karmic situation, as they're evaluating for themselves? Do I have what it takes to live by myself? So what are those things what's part of that checklist?
Well, first of all, you have to have good knowledge of the basic Dhamma. Secondly, you need some practical skills as well to be comfortable in solitude in nature, because it's not going to be in an apartment in the middle of New York City. It's going to be in nature. And what's your relationship to these beings around you, the animals? And so you need some practical skills. You need a reasonable health as well, because nobody's there to help you. Nobody's there to take care of you. You get sick, and you have to be quite independent. And then it won't work if you cannot meditate. If there's no point in really being a hermit if you just sit there and read novels all day. Congratulations. It's and it's not natural. It's not natural to humans to be solitary, voluntary, a hermit, rather than an involuntary. You know, some people are just pushed to the margins because their personalities are just too, or they're out of their minds. And so that's not what a hermit is. And so you have to have a lot of sanity in order to do this. And the only way you can sustain it is if you do have the samadhi. And it's not just the wisdom, but the samadhi, because that's how you stay well and refreshed. If you don't have that, you will be running for town soon enough. And so those are qualifications. Some degree of the capacity to just spend an hour at least in ease and well-being. Otherwise, you'll be just restless and fantasizing and remembering and so forth. By the way, when you have all the live long, at least 18 hours a day of conscious waking time and nothing to distract you, you will have memories will come. You will start to remember your life and things that you would never remember if you were in ordinary life being preoccupied. But you have all the time in the world to just go back into these, and of course clarity of memory as well happens. And it's not bad. I mean, it's not something you dwell on, but the mind having so much time and space starts to change in different ways, But you need those skills. You need the practical skills, reasonable health, and some access to serenity, so that you can endure this,
So I think we will move to questions soon, but just one more is, you told us about a dream you had when you came out of monastic retreat, maybe several years ago, where you were driving a motorcycle at the end of your retreat, and then you realized you had to start driving a bus again to take a bunch of people along with you.
Right.
But you also realized that you didn't know where you got the motorcycle and couldn't give it back because you're a hermit at heart in some measure, Longpor. So, you did ordain and take on these robes, and yet you also live in a community now. So what made you decide to not just take on robes and retreat to another shack? Like, what benefit, why did you decide to live in and cultivate a community rather than a completely solitary existence again?
Good question. Why did I?
You don't have to think about it too much. Just stick around for at least an hour.
Yeah. No, I think it's a beautiful experience. And by the way, so 10 years ago, between 59 and 60, so I'm 70 now, I just went off to a kuti and had no interactions, just would come over, get my meal, and that was it. So for a whole year, I went back to the hermit thing. And it was a beautiful experience. I wanted to see, is that still there for me and so forth? And it is a beautiful thing. And again, the dream is important. On the last day of this 1 year, so I went in on my 59th birthday, came out on my 60th birthday. Or sometimes I say, went in on my 59th birthday and came out on my 50th birthday. I was 10 years younger. The dream was, I was riding a motorcycle with some other people who were riding a motorcycle. And by the way, I just read an account of Chinese hermit monks. It was Red Pine or something.
We just interviewed him.
Yeah, so I had read this, and some of them had been they'd even been an abbot in a monastery, and then they decided to live the hermit life. So I'm reading about these hermits, and then I well, because I have to take some people to school. And they say, well, why do you have to do that? Well, I really like the motorcycle, but I feel that I must do this. And then I realized I didn't know where the motorcycle was rented from. I couldn't remember where I had got this thing from. I couldn't take it back. So it made me realize that you can't undo your hermit tendencies, your solitary tendencies, even though you kind of feel obliged to. You have a community and you must go back, and it's to take some other people along. But you have to make that choice to do that. Yeah.
Just one rapid fire question. What percentage of the American population, say, do you think is ready to be a hermit? It has that meditational prerequisite and sense and balance of mind to make good use of it?
1 in 1,000, maybe 1 in 10,000.
In the Canadian population?
Oh, 1 in 3. Even in monastic life, in the history of monasticism, the choice of the really solitary practitioner is fairly rare in the population. Ajahn Chah's training system, he realized that is the idea, the cultivation of solitude, and but at the same time, why we actually flourish as a community is that we can flourish we are taught to be in community and how to do that. Not all monk training is very good at that. His idea is like, you come to all these meetings and you do communal work and there's teachings and you show up and you sit beside each other for the meals and you go on alms round together, and then he says, now just go to your kutis and no meetings, no nothing, and don't go and visit each other in the kuti either. So forced solitude. Now some monks do well in the community and they don't like when they're sent to their kuti. Others can't wait to go to the kuti. They don't do well in community. Some don't do well in either situation. They're bad in community and bad by themselves. And then there's somebody who's okay in community and okay with the solitude. So he's training you in two ways, but many will not want that real solitude thing for extensive periods of time. And I think the Buddha is saying that as well. That's why he develops the Sangha, because it's not, it's against human nature, really, But and the only way you can do it is if you discover the meditation. Then you understand how it's done. But if you don't have that, that's the magic key. If you don't have that, it really won't be successful. Yeah.
I believe there's a sutta where the Buddha compares someone intent on pursuing solitary life without jhana to a cat trying to follow an elephant into a pond and not being a happy cat by the end of it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. You just end up being a drowning. It was a rabbit, actually. It was a rabbit trying to be like elephants. Actually, are water animals, and they enjoy swimming and blowing water in the air. And a rabbit saw them and thought, "I'd like to do that," but he jumps in, and then he really can't swim. He's drowning in there. So there are many stories about monks they're young monks and they want to go off and be a hermit, just like Sariputta and so forth. And he doesn't. He denies them 3 times, and then he says, "Okay, go," And then 2 weeks later, they drag their sorry butt back. I just spent the whole time fantasizing about my girlfriend and angry at the chirping animals around me.
Silly rabbit. Huts are for pros.
It's a training like anything else in life. It's not just something. It sounds great, especially if you're oppressed by too many duties and you're in the city and it's noisy and you're just like, I'd love to be a hermit. Well, you'll find out the demands on you are great, Yeah.
Well, Lumpur, maybe we can open stuff up to the live stream chat, and if
Sure.
people have other questions, feel free to type them in.
Right.
We have several questions that have come in through the live stream, and the first one is from Jeremy. When one is living alone and trying to keep renunciation precepts, it is easy to be too strict or too loose. Any advice for finding a sustainable balance?
Yeah, I would say if I had to go back and talk to myself as in my lay hermit life, I would say, relax, dude. Doesn't have to be so hard. Try to get a better stove, and it's not necessary to have that level of austerity. It's about your mind. It's not how you can endure these harsh situations. It's be kinder to yourself. But on the and don't occasionally you can have a dessert or something. So it's oh, I think you want to probably err a little bit on the side of warmth and a little indulgence rather than the opposite. It's very easy to see personalities. The angry person will inflict this on themselves thinking it's good for them. And they don't realize it's actually just negative emotion towards them. So we have this list of 13 allowable dhutangas or ascetic practices. But the Buddha says the motivation for this is not how tough you can be or inflicting any kind of pain on yourself. It's just for the sake of simplicity and contentment. So if you can, if the way you're living is just to keep things simple, that's the right motivation. But if you got to check here, are you a little angry at yourself? Do you want to be a little hard on yourself? That's not the right motivation. And also to be just indulgent, too soft, too permissive is not the right motivation either. So you're finding that middle where it's goodwill, the joy of simplicity, and you're trying to make yourself well and happy, actually, is what you're trying to do. So that's the way to find the middle between those things. Yeah.
Ajahn Kovilo, any thoughts on it?
I think being perhaps one of those 9,999 Americans who don't naturally fit into a hut. I think seeking out spiritual teachers, someone to be a mirror and someone that one can check in with. And am I going off? How am I holding these precepts and doing it in a way which someone who I trust and feel has more maturity and stability and of mind to be able to tell me, actually, it does seem like you look a little bit off. I mean, if the teacher can tell that you look a little bit off, that says a bunch, but just one thought. Yeah.
I think also the sense for me of, like, when you step into quiet, and I've never done anything, same with not being up quite for 3 years of complete solitude, but the sense of, internal shifting that just happens when I have some measure of solitude. Like, my sense is a being can only take so much entropy at one moment. And so, like, the structures and regularity of a schedule and certain constraints, you're not proliferating about what you're going to have for the meal. It's peanut butter, and I think the deeper you go, the more those structures can be really helpful for a sense of security. Where I've seen it go wrong, and sometimes I think pushing the limit for a sense of, like, I think Longpo Cha talks about it as like a bit of spicy pepper, like a sense of almost playfulness of, like, okay, can I push myself a little bit? Where I've seen it go really wrong is when there's this almost sense of violence and, like, sustained, triage or amputation of parts of yourself. And, what's difficult, I think, is if people don't sense that practice isn't progressing, often they'll try to double down and cut off more of their heart and, like, be more restrictive. And often I find what's missing is more of a sense of, a lot of hermits I know, like Tenzin Palmo did calligraphy when she was in the cave. And I know for some, when they move into some measure of seclusion, to sustain a sense of, like, flourishing normalcy and warmth, just having some measure of art or way of bringing joy and happiness alongside the meditation. I don't know what you think about that long pour for those who need a bit of other supports to keep things in line.
Oh yeah, well, you know, you're in the monastic life, and it's a very strange life. We were talking about Thomas Merton the other day, entering the strictest order of Catholic monks at the age of 27. This would be before the Second World War. And that's mid 20th century in America. And all his friends were just absolutely like, what are you doing? I mean, a monk and a cloistered monk? Like, what? Wasn't that 500 years ago that people did that? So he said to become a monk strikes the normal society in America in the mid 20th century as a scandal and an outrage to do this. So we're even weirder because we're doing that as Buddhist monks in not just the mid 20th century, but we're in the 21st century, the Christian 21st century, in a totally different society that has not a great Buddhist context, and we're choosing to do it as monastics. And so this is outlandish enough, and we want to be creative and productive with this transformation of young men who have decided to do this. And we need to appreciate the shape of their characters and their cultural conditioning, so that it doesn't ruin them. And this can't. I don't think Thai monks who were born in 1917 could possibly grasp the cultural structure of the Western monk's mind and psychology appropriately. They have great intuition about these things, but they don't understand the cultural shaping. So it's important that we treat ourselves thus delicately. I think Thoreau, the phrase was from Thoreau, we're rough with ourselves, you know. Human is a bit of a flower, and you must handle it carefully and delicately, you know, not be rough with it, you know. So yeah, we need to appreciate different characters and different needs, and that's what the Buddha does. Well, and there's no cookie cutter, there's no magic, there's no silver bullet technique that you just put everybody through this machine. You need to recognize individuality and understand where it needs to be restrained, or it's okay, you know. This is important, yeah.
Next question is from the live stream from Bodhipala. Would each Ajahn please say which gradual training sutta they might recommend for a lay hermit and why? How much would one have to understand to effectively use the gradual training instruction?
Let's start with the other monks so they have a word in edgewise.
I would definitely recommend the Maha Asapura Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya number 39. There's a book on our website called Thus You Should Train Yourselves, and in that sutta, the Buddha goes through a very systematic gradual training, starting off very interestingly with hiri and ottappa, the sense of conscience and concern, which seems like an essential hermit quality, mental quality, to have this internal sense of right and wrong, and then progressing through bodily, verbal, mental purity of conduct, right livelihood, sense restraint, moderation in eating, devotion to wakefulness, being able to practice, get rid of the 5 hindrances and attain the jhanas and then see insight. So in each one of those, the Buddha frames things as we will be ones who have a sense of hiri and ottappa, conscience and fear of wrongdoing. We will be ones who are purified in bodily, verbal, mental action, all the way down. And I feel like that framing of I will be one who is really takes things. It really encourages and elicits a sense of self-responsibility, which you can prime your day with. You can recite all of those every morning. So
That's great. And I was going to pick that sutta too. But because it's the only one I know that has gradual training in it that
someone
I...
you poet.
Well, there's that too,
Yeah,
isn't there?
okay.
No, it's okay. But no, that is a beautiful answer. And maybe I'd supplement just by saying one really interesting thing is the Buddha's discourses to Rahula, his son. It's the only place in the canon where you can see the entire instruction or the entire trajectory of the Buddha's instruction to one individual play out over the course of a life. So you see the Buddha's instruction to Rahula as a child, and then as a teenager, and then, into adulthood. And just this progression from like a deep sense of honesty with the analogy of the water pitcher being empty and full, to instruction about asubha, breath meditation, and so on. And I think that's a really interesting way of kind of getting a really robust picture of what a trajectory of practice could look like for anyone, but also very much for a lay hermit, because the number of kind of meditative techniques that, say, between the Buddha and Venerable Sariputta, Rahula takes in is, I think, provides a really interesting palette for someone practicing to be a lay hermit. And, just to say that the very word lay hermit implies that you're still having these interactions with other people. You're trying to maintain chitta viveka, seclusion of the heart or a certain poise while in contact with the world. And so these qualities, interpersonal qualities of honesty that are emphasized with Rahula, or many elements of the gradual training, which Ajahn Kovilo pointed out, which you wouldn't automatically assign to a hermetic life. I think for a lay hermit, they're still absolutely essential. Like, how do you emerge from those interactions you have without these echoes playing out into your meditation? And I think the deeper you're going internally, the more pure that conduct has to be. So those interpersonal teachings are still, I think, quite relevant. Ajahn, do you have anything to add, Longpor?
Yeah, of course, once you take up a serious meditative life, and that's the only way to go, like the higher parts of the path only are in the last three factors: right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. And the best overall sutta for that is the Mahasatipatthana Sutta, which give you a nice little catalog that you take along. This Maha, meaning large, Sati, meaning mindfulness, Patthana, foundations of mindfulness, is actually a trunk of teachings. It may not, in a sense, have been delivered as a single teaching by the Buddha, but you'll find all kinds of other smaller versions of Satipatthana Sutta. And so the big one is where you collect all of the ones that were given. And so the monk has lots of stuff to carry along to the forest when they go off to the forest. And of course into lay life, as a meditator in lay life as well. So, but quite often it's misrepresented or it's been appropriated by a number of different schools, and it's been taught in a very clinical, dry way, vipassana type stuff and so forth. So I recommend that you, first of all, get the sutta and read the commentaries, but also listen to Ajahn Sona's 12 talks on the Satipatthana, so that it integrates with other things and keeps it expansive. It's your whole life. It's a whole life experience. It's not an intellectual game of focusing on tiny things. It's not also not a silver bullet technique. It's quite expansive, large, and certain parts need to be emphasized for certain types of personalities. And so it's large but contains a lot, as it says in itself. It's the only way. It's the only way to do this. You have it's an active mind, but it's a broad active mind, and it's not, when we say mind, it's really an emotional thing. This practice is about how do you feel, not how do you think. How do you feel? How has this led to well-being, the elimination of the negative emotions, and the restoration of these positive emotions that are constantly an aspect of your being. This is the nature of the enlightened mind. It has some emotional qualities, and one of them is joy, and the other one is serenity, and it basically has no other emotions to it. So that's incredibly important. Yeah. Let's have another question.
Our next question is from Tyler. Good evening, Ajahns. Ajahn Sona, if you had a student that was in a place where you were to recommend hermitude to them, what qualities might they possess or lack for that to be your recommendation?
Yeah, I've never had a student that I recommend hermit life to. And I often say I've given 10,000 one-on-one interviews, but it's way more than that. It's at least 15,000 one-on-one talks with people who are meditating, probably in a course that I'm giving, or living in the monastery for extended periods of time. And only if they are going to be a hermit do I say, well, here's some advice, but I don't tell them, you really are cut out for the hermit life. You should go be a hermit. It's a specialty, and I would say for most people, yes, explore some periods of solitude, but supported solitude. Be checking in with a wise and companion, somebody that has your best interests in mind and has some experience. Make sure that you know that you can go for advice and help anytime, and you should, and don't be too proud to ask for help or something like this. So most of the advice would be, this is a tricky thing, and you're trying to do it for well-being, not to be tough or anything like this, but to make your life better. And if it doesn't, then don't do it. Find another form that will help you more. And it's much more likely that it'll be some sort of community or interaction. So yeah, it's a kind of like, I wouldn't advise a lot of people to just commit to being a concert pianist, specializing in Bach-only concerts, and refusing to have any other form of livelihood as a backup. Don't quit your day job, please. It's because it's so remote. It's a nice aspiration, and to appreciate and have a little collection of hermit heroes as well. There's some good books about hermits and who these people who are successful. And it is possible for a human to do this, but it's not necessary to be able to necessarily do this in this life, Yeah. Sub-commentary?
I mean, no, that sounds, that doesn't surprise me, Longpor, that this has not been a piece of advice you give to many, if any. And yet, I know Tanajan Jayasaro's compared, you hear about these trees in the Amazon that are gigantic, and you've never seen a tree like that, and you've never even seen a picture of it. But just somehow knowing that those trees exist kind of fills the spot in your heart. Like, it feels good to know that. And for me, hermits kind of are the same. Like, they're this archetype that it makes me so, it's so heartening to know that in the course of human history, there's been these quiet spirits who've lived these humble, gentle lives and been happy. Because for me, it represents this archetype of the fact that happiness does not lie in all the, worldly entanglements and material comforts which we so often lean on. And it's one thing to say that, and it's another to really know that this can be lived. And so I understand the power and seduction of that archetype, and what monastic and many practitioner with the ability hasn't like tried to live that life completely and sometimes recklessly. And I think it's important to keep in the heart as one lighthouse among many. And so often I do find the power of the Longpo Cha lineage and the great hole in so many practitioners' hearts today is community. And for me, after someone has learned to live in community, because that for me is so difficult for many moderns, I really do think there's a point where a monastic or a practitioner, where I think you probably would give the advice, like, go live alone for a year or longer. But for me, so often the first step is, can you live with others? And at the same time, in a practitioner's life, having that lighthouse or Polaris of like, you should be getting time in seclusion every week, a few times a year, like, is absolutely essential. So yeah, aiming for a grace of movement, rather a violence of monotone, and not quitting our day job even as we're kind of practicing the piano a bit. Ajahn?
Yeah, I mean, it really is trying to do this, to go off, say, try it for a day or a weekend, and it can be a real humility forcing function, because stability and quietude of mind are something that you can't fake. So many skills can be faked on some level, but when you go and try to just be alone with your mind, it can be exceedingly humbling. This Dunning-Kruger effect, where you think that you'll be really good at some particular skill, and you don't actually realize all of your ineptitude. But this is very much, you can see it in people who, in so many, we're so idealistic in America, in the West in particular, and we think we'd be a great hermit, but then you go, and if you can have the humility of mind to look at yourself and to hear from others, hear other voices, then maybe we're not as awesome and hermit built as we may have thought. So,
and it has been interesting. Like, Ajahn, Kovilo, and I have both lived in communal monasteries for years, and I do think there's a point now where we really appreciate this push to seclusion. We've been trying to cultivate retreat every year for ourselves, but that first step of living in community for so many, I feel like, is just essential. But more and more, I think we have really appreciated that sense of seclusion, which is ironic because now we're in Seattle. It's part of a big community. So, yeah.
Well, remember that the Buddha sets up this demand that you train with a teacher for first 5 years of your monastic life, and you're really not allowed to live alone. You must live in community. You must spend the rains in community. You must attend your meetings for reviewing your virtue every 2 weeks. You perform duties to other monks. You attend to senior monks, etc. And this is for 5 years. The Buddha is quite aware that people have all kinds of unrealistic ideas about themselves. But after the 5 years, it is possible to explore periods of solitude and to see if you're suitable for that. And that's what monks between 5 and 10 years often do. They see how it's going with their practice. And they quite often find out it's not so easy. I kind of need the community, so I'm going back to the community. And so you need at least 10 years to be a teacher of other monks, and then some qualifications in order to be a teacher of that. So this is a long training process. I also, in terms of the Catholic monastic structure, the Benedictine structure, Benedict himself, as a guy in his mid-20s, went off and became a hermit, and a real hermit, like living in a cave where he had food lowered down to him. He never went out, never talked to anybody for several years. And he thought it was wonderful. But he realized, this is great, but nobody, who's going to do this? What if I set up a community that trains hermits in community? So he set this thing up. So little communities of 12 people, a dozen. And the idea was that you spend, maybe up to 10 years in the community, and then you're ready for the solitude thing. But over the centuries, now brings in Thomas Merton, they forgot about the period where you're ready to be a hermit. And it's like this expectation that you're just going to stay in community for your whole life. And he's reading the history of this, and he's saying, well, when do you get to be the hermit thing? When do you get to go and... So he was aspiring to that. And eventually he was allowed by the abbot, who was kind of like utterly mystified by this request. But he was so insistent, eventually he allowed him to have a little hermitage built. And by the way, I've visited this hermitage. And it's only a few hundred yards from the monastery. But it's a freestanding little place where he could just be there. He would have to visit from time to time to do confessions or something, but it was really a solitary life. And he seemed to flourish in that, but at the same time, he kept up quite a correspondence with people. Very interestingly, the abbot who had for so long resisted this desire by him, after Merton died, that abbot became a hermit. So, it's not a bad idea, actually. But we get on this mindset, and we have to go back to the early suttas, and so especially the Rhinoceros Sutta, go alone, advocacy. It's one of the earliest possible suttas, and it's an advocacy of going alone. People have to understand, though, it's not just step out. You got to still do your 5 years of training. You have your obligations to community and everything. So it's not an invitation to just wander off as a hermit without the skills and the training and the preliminaries. So this all has to be. But we need to restore this again and again, the fact that, yes, it is possible to live in solitude as a monk, and you're supported by you still have to get your food from lay people, and you obviously have to be within arm's length of a layperson at least once per day if you want to eat. So it's not like complete, you're not living in a cave and people lowering a basket down. So it's never complete solitude. Yeah.
Yeah, we couldn't do that stylite practice where we're up on a pole because lay people would have to climb up there and handle food.
Well, Longpor, we're very grateful that you've kept the bus and the motorcycle. Maybe we're just in the sidecar, both of us.
The motorcycle's parked behind the garage.
We're just in the sidecar. I don't know if we should be wrapping stuff up or if we
I
have
think
time for one
so.
more.
It's about an hour into it, so they went by very quickly, but we'll wrap it up and leave you wanting more. Stay tuned.
And Longpor, if we can just say, you've been supportive since the moment we came here, and it means a lot to actually come here and be welcome to the community and into your mentorship. So thank you so much.
Right, and we are sacrificing them on the fires of service to the community in Seattle. There's no way they can get away to be hermits because they have commitment to this developing community. So appreciate their willingness to do this and to be engaged with everybody, and the enormous amounts of physical and mental energy that takes to do this. But I'm sure that they're feeling very rewarded by their efforts as well, because it's very meritorious, and there's a lot of positive energy generated by actually putting yourself out there and seeing people around you being uplifted by Dhamma. And they both trained in very austere traditions and are very well informed in terms of the Dhamma and their scholastic achievements as well. So very nice. Please support them in their development of the Seattle Clear Mountain Monastery.
Thank you, Longpor.
Okay, that's it for now.